This video contains spoilers. So, I gotta be honest. I've never been interested in M-rated games. Don't worry, I'm not here to give you a lecture on how violence is corrupting the youth or whatever stupid thing I can pull out of my ass. As I honestly think the opposite. Violence can be really compelling in a form of media. I mean, I'm a JoJo fan, a fighting game fan, and a JoJo fighting game fan. So I am the last person to tell you why violence is wrong or whatever. But my problem with M-rated games is that, more often than not, M-rated games tend to be hyper-violent exclusively for the sake of being hyper-violent. Or they're unnecessarily sexual for pretty much no reason at all. It's like they mix concrete shoes with cyanide, TNT, neckties, contracts, and high voltage and then sell that abomination for dirt cheap. Well, I hate to break it to you, Mr. President, but that's not funny. I know for a fact that some games do this on purpose so that they can justify their M rating and not have to worry about trying to tell a mature story. And thematically, they fall flatter than Mr. Game & Watch being forced underneath 10 tons of titanium weights being stood upon by Wario! If only there was an M-rated game where its violence enhanced the game instead of hindered it. If all that blood, gore, and sex actually fit with the game's theme. There are lots of them. Like, no joke. There are lots of them. For Martel's sake, Samurai Shodown was literally my favorite game of 2019 for this exact reason. But yeah, I like No More Heroes way more. Both of the No More Heroes games have been on my radar for nearly a decade, but I've never been able to play them. So I am more than happy that they got ported to the Nintendo Switch, as they have swiftly become two of my favorite games of all time. The gameplay is the perfect blend of simplicity and engagement. The bosses are entertaining characters while also being fun to fight. Travis is so much of a badass that it's one of those rare cases where it doesn't even matter that he's a simp. Oh, come on! And now there's a third game that revives the series? Yo, I cannot wait to get around to playing that. Oh yeah, and No More Heroes 3 just came out. Nice. But I've never wanted to relive a game as badly and quickly as No More Heroes. The first game might have blown me away so much that my head came off, but I personally found No More Heroes 2, Desperate Struggle, to be more fun to play and more thought-provoking than the first game. Though I am aware that this is not the most popular opinion on the planet. In fact, there are two excellent videos that dissect this game and go over its flaws. But wait! Finish watching my video first, and then watch those two videos to form your own opinion. But right now, I would like to make a case to claim how No More Heroes 2 actively averts the common conundrums that a colossal collection of video game sequels sadly slip into. And although this bad boy becomes blown by blemishes beyond compare, I'd still title this titan as the tool to topple the terrible taints that a fair flock of follies fall for. In other words, I want to talk about why No More Heroes 2 is almost a perfect sequel. Okay, before we dive into No More Heroes, let's go over a few reasons why so many other video game sequels fail to capture the magic of the first game. A perfect movie sequel, though a taxing task, should be a breeze as long as the writers have enough care and put in enough effort. Video game sequels, on the other hand, have way more to work with. You have to improve the world building, the writing, the characters, the themes, and the gameplay without being too derivative of the first game. This is why JRPG series like Final Fantasy, Tales, and objectively inferior Tales have their new games that take place in different worlds with different themes and characters. For the most part. There will be times when they dive into direct sequels, but it's not always perfect. While the Tales series has been mostly on point with its sequels and prequels, even if some of them aren't the most impeccable games in the world. As for Final Fantasy,
where can I buy a phone?
Not so much. All you really need to do is to see what people thought of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. Yeah, we did get amazing games like Crisis Core, the rest of it wasn't very well liked. And do I need to remind people of the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy? Honest question, I've never played the games myself, but if you can get me to 100,000 subscribers, I will do a full critique on the entire trilogy! Maybe. But say you wanted your sequel to stay in the same world with the same characters and still be good. Can it be done? Technically yes, but very few games have actually succeeded. One of the only sufficient examples that I can come up with off the top of my head is Donkey Kong Country 2. We get to meet Dixie Kong for the first time, we have all those secrets to collect, we even get something of an expanded world. Though, let's be real, Donkey Kong and his friends are deeper than you think, as I've talked about before, but Donkey Kong Country clearly doesn't have its narrative as a priority. Very much unlike Star Fox. Star Fox 64 would be a great game that comes to mind. It improves everything that the first Star Fox game does and expands upon the lore and characters while fleshing out new ones in simple but effective ways. This would actually be a perfect sequel, if it weren't for the fact that it's a reboot. But believe it or not, a lot of Sony's older exclusives have managed to maintain rather amazing sequels, from the Crash and Spyro trilogies to the Jak, Sly, and Ratchet trilogies. You can never go wrong with the rule of 3. These games take place almost immediately after the previous game, or at least a year or a few afterwards, give or take. Unlike other video game sequels that don't. Many times they take place whenever the heck they want to. Sometimes it's for the better, like with Majora's Mask, but other times it's... Kingdom Hearts 2 is undoubtedly better than the first game, though this is where Kingdom Hearts started to get its name for having bad writing. And while this is still one of my favorite imitation JRPGs, let's be realistic on this one. The story and world building do kinda hinder its quality as a sequel. Aside from those examples, video game sequels don't usually try to be different from the previous game. The most they do is just add some extra content, and that's about it. This isn't inherently a bad thing. Game series like Mario, Mega Man, Little Big Planet, and most crossover fighting games have been doing this for years, and nobody's complaining. They aren't meant to be story-driven games, so you're not expecting like a Terminator 2 coming out of Mario or something. Though that doesn't mean that every series gets immunity. Specifically Pokemon, which is story-driven, or at least tries to be. I heard the spin-offs are pretty good though, but I don't care about that. Plus, to Pokemon's credit, they've never dived into bad video game sequels. Soul Calibur 5 takes away a plethora of characters that the players became attached to and replaces them with mostly uninteresting characters. And the few characters that do return are given almost nothing to do. There's also Mega Man X7, which actively changes the Mega Man formula for the worse. It also adds a ton of unnecessary gimmicks that don't work, chooses not to flesh out its new characters, makes the titular character unlockable, and has the 2 follow-up games act as if X7 never happened. I'd also consider Star Fox Command as a bad sequel. I like Star Fox Command, and I still don't know if I want to make a video on that game or not, but it barely adds a smidge of life to the franchise. The most that happens in that game is that Slippy has a fiancé, and Fox and Crystal have communication issues, both of which would be fine if they weren't given as much attention as they got. Then again, I don't want to be too hard on this game or any other sequel as, again, making a proper follow-up to an amazing game without being derivative is difficult to do, but at the same time, it does make me praise games like No More Heroes 2 even more. That game alters the gameplay for the better, adds more to the game's narrative, and treats its lead characters with respect, thus becoming a faithful sequel that I would consider to be perfect. Right off the bat, this game starts off with a fairly different tone from the first game. While No More Heroes 1 was more grounded, No More Heroes 2 is much more in-your-face at times. I've seen some criticisms for how in-your-face this game can be, but I think there's a valid reason for this that I'll go into later. But to balance this out, other parts of the game are more somber, such as the opening sequence foreshadowing the direction that the game wants to take Travis, who, by the way, looks much slicker this time around. Can we talk about these character models and cutscenes? What a glow up! They might not be as stylized as the first game, but it does fit the idea of how the character models are supposed to look while being, at least to me, more appealing to watch. And the animations in the cutscenes are as smooth as the muddy waters of a mannish boy. The cutscenes are almost as tight as the combat on the Switch. I heard that the Wii version's combat had clunky controls, no camera option, and a frame rate of 30 FPS instead of 60 FPS, all of which were fixed in the Switch version from what I've heard. I still don't know if motion controls were optional in the Wii version, but I feel that this combat system translates very well onto a Pro controller. The weapon upgrades are gone, which does kinda suck, but it has the best weapon from the first game almost at the start and 2 more weapons that are really fun to use. And what's even cooler is that you can switch between these weapons whenever you want. The gameplay has some other features that are welcomed with open arms. You can mix up slash combos with kicks, beats, and wrestling moves. And instead of only finishing the combo with the sword slice, you can finish it with a wrestling move, which feels much better than the first game. Not only can they kill enemies regularly, but their faster speed makes them viable and more satisfying for ending combos. Combine this with the massively improved soundtrack as well as the excellent boss roster, and the gameplay is faithfully enjoyable. And that's not even mentioning the side games that have this stylized 8-bit art style. They're homages to classic arcade games, especially with the catchy music playing in the background. As simple as they are, they're really engaging in terms of control, and have a lot of charm to them visually. If you want to know why this video got delayed, well, now you know why. I mean, how else am I gonna pay for all of these clothing options? I don't like the constant screaming in the store's playlist, but I can't stay mad when you get this many options to stylize yourself. Says the guy who didn't even bother changing his jacket at all during his playthrough. But the best part is that I can spend all this money without worrying about a virtual paywall. But along with the customization options comes the side jobs that give you a ton of money, so spend away! Just understand that Travis won't be the only character you get to play as in this game. There are a few levels that allow you to play as Shinobu and Mr. Sir Henry Motherfucker! Given how Travis's gameplay isn't changed very much outside of a few quality of life buffs, it's cool to see new playable characters every once in a while. Not a lot of people were happy with them for different reasons. I don't know if Shinobu's gameplay was changed in the Switch version, but I honestly really enjoyed her levels. Yeah, I do hate her boss fights with a passion, but the levels were honestly pretty fun. Her platforming wasn't nearly as clunky as I thought it would be, and the jump height is pretty good. Plus, something that I learned in my playthrough is that you can actually run faster while charging your weapon. I know that she likes to taunt after doing a combo, but just mix up your slashes and she'll never taunt. And as for Henry, as fun as he is, I agree with everyone else in the sense that I hate how Henry is only playable for one boss fight because consecutive dashes and energy blasts that fire in spurts is one heck of a time. But if I had to pick the absolute best thing about this game that redeems everything wrong with this game to me, it would be exercising your cat because he became a big old chunker and it's your job to get him back into shape by using quick time effects to help him lose weight! And your reward is an even worse version of the running slash, but it's there if you want it. It's not like you'll ever get much use out of it against the bosses because, let's just say that they aren't as straightforward as you might think. In terms of gameplay or character, yes. If you wanted to break down No More Heroes to its bare bones like a YouTuber that tries to act smarter than they are, then No More Heroes is a boss gauntlet. Walk through an area until you get to the boss, beat the boss, boom, get your pay, on to the next level. Both games had enough self-awareness so that the bosses were designed to be good, at least as an overall collection. This is what the first No More Heroes succeeded at. Not only were they fun to fight, but they also related to Travis in some way, whether they challenged his personality and philosophies or just wanted to be a source of entertainment to him. The only thing is that they were kinda restricted to just being regular dudes and dudettes, but they work for what the game wanted to be. You can't be mad at a game where the true final boss is a brawl in the parking lot. But since Desperate Struggle ends up being a bigger story than its predecessor, its bosses have more to work with. Not every boss was as good as the first game, and as we'll get to soon, a particular boss was terrible. But the good ones are fantastic. The game started strong with Skelter Helter, got better with Nathan Copeland, and ended up having a more memorable collection of boss fights than the first game. They serve a creative narrative purpose that I will get into later, but right now let's focus on how they work as bosses. They all have unique attack patterns to watch out for. Even though they do different attacks at random, most of them have distinct visual cues so that you can react to whatever moves they do, especially since the dodge rolls fast enough so that you can. The bosses aren't gonna let you get away with just hacking and slashing, as it would fail as a boss fight because it would boil down to a glorified enemy encounter, and nobody likes that. Except when it's done well, but it almost never is. These bosses either constantly tank your attacks, dodge your slashes, or run to another area of the battlefield. To circumvent all of this, you need to find an opening and deal as much damage as you can before they attack. This is serviceable for an action game, but serviceable is not good enough for a boss gauntlet. So they have to be fleshed out as something more than just the big bad boy that you gotta kill. And that's something that this game is a natural at. I love how they feel like real characters instead of tools because I hate when games do that. I adore how they make use of these elaborate backgrounds. I admire the music tracks that play during each boss fight. I appreciate how they all poke fun at pop culture. I relish the way that Travis finishes them because of the well-implemented QuickTime events. I am more over the idea that these bosses are so good that I ran out of synonyms because there's so much to love about these bosses. Also, yes, I did use amour wrong. Amour is a noun that means a secret or illicit love affair or lover. If I used this word in a sentence, it would go as follows. These bosses have a rather unconventional amour. But to get into that, we need to go over how the game handles our no more hero, Travis Touchdown. At first glance, Travis begins as the same otaku that he always was, wanking off to killing bad guys, enjoying porn, which in hindsight is pretty much the same thing, and entering the UAA once again just to get laid, and also to avenge his best friend's death, but details. One key difference between Travis in this game and the first is that Travis is seen as an icon among assassins, being titled the Crownless King, the no more hero. He's even garnered a few fans like Charlie McDonald and Kimmy Howell. Sure, the latter is an optional boss, but if anything, that proves just how high his popularity has been getting because this aspiring assassin is willing to risk being mutilated just to meet Travis.
So, don't hold back, okay?
Alright then, but only because you asked! Even the times when you get to play as Henry and Shinobu still have something to do with Travis. Henry fights one of the anime girls in a dream that Travis definitely doesn't fetishize. And Shinobu fights a new, impossibly awful version of Destroy Man who reminisces his fight with him even though he got split in half by him. Shinobu in this game is probably the biggest example of Travis's sudden and unnecessary fame. From the obvious stuff like calling him her master despite never being trained under him at all, to the subtle things like how she will constantly shout out "Moe!" and
"You have no moe."
in her gameplay without even knowing what it means.
What does moe mean?
Oh, you youthfully innocent girl. Travis isn't a hero. He was never meant to be one. No More Heroes was a satire of action games with stupidly self-indulgent cutscenes where every boss felt like it could be the final boss, only for Travis to somehow make short work of them. Assuming that they didn't do so for him given how pathetic he really is. He's a bigger jackass than teenage MTV wannabes, and now you want to put him on some sort of pedestal? I guess that'll happen when you end up making a sequel to a game because of fame despite not wanting to make one initially. Meta. Though, the thing about parodies and satires that way too many people overlook is that while you can make fun of whatever you want with no restraint, at the end of the day, you still gotta give your story some heart. And the way that Travis was handled is the highlight of the game for me. Travis may be motivated to climb the ranks once again to get revenge on, let's just say, the thing that murdered Bishop. But throughout the game, he slowly reveals that it's more than just getting revenge. After beating Ryuji, he chooses to spare him because he simply enjoyed the thrill of fighting an honorable warrior, only for Sylvia to gun him down like a thug. Wait, is this Travis suddenly not wanting to kill people anymore? Even though he has murdered dozens of named individuals with no remorse? Even though he has been labeled as a man who uses violence to express himself to a point where it's almost comical? Even in a game where the violence and blood get to this level of excessiveness? Listen, I perfectly understand why people wouldn't like No More Heroes in general, or at least why they wouldn't like Travis as a character. But I can't help but feel like this was an intentional decision to make Travis think about the cost of being an assassin. Whenever he heard the testimonies of his targets, he'd banter with them and shrug most of them off. And even when he did care, he still showed no remorse in killing them. I mean, he's a shut-in who shut out any chance of understanding what a moral compass even is. But now he's gaining a better understanding of what it means to be an assassin, and he feels conflicted. He doesn't have any sort of killing is wrong narrative, but he does acknowledge that the UAA's policies are inhumane. But those policies are practically the same as how he used to kill other assassins himself. I haven't joined the pool of people who believe that this game is deliberately tedious because I have too much fun with the combat and dialogue to feel that way, but I am aware that Suda51 can and will purposefully hinder the game's quality to prove a point, and it seems to lead into a satisfying finish. Plus, the game itself is still fun to play and experience, so I'd forgive it regardless, but on to that conclusion. Before the fight with Alice Twilight, Travis walks across the alleyway where there is this massive mural of his face. It's one of my favorite moments in the game because not only does it represent how far Travis has come, but it's a subtle, bittersweet message of how his reputation as an assassin made him into a hero of a twisted ilk. It's not a suitable ilk to make him a real hero, yet it's big enough to where he's still gonna get ambushed by more bad dudes, because for every person that respects him, there are always at least 5 more that want to take him down. Or in this case, about 100 more. Because just like the build up to Margaret Moonlight, the path to the next assassin is a long, gory road. But he eventually reaches Alice at the roof of a building. I'm not sure if it's the same building as the one with the mural on it, but it's at least within walking distance, which is already enough to justify this fight being as important as it is. She goes over how the life of an assassin is a never-ending cycle of violence and bloodshed that is virtually impossible to escape. As much as she hates this bitter cycle, she can't help but enjoy the sweet thrill and excitement to become the next top-ranked assassin, and she just has to accept both of these traits. You can see this realization when she's burning pictures of her family, which includes her sister, Margaret Moonlight. This is where the player can finally understand why Travis is renowned as the crownless king. At least to Alice. It's not just because he reached the top, but because he left the cycle after doing so. And if Alice can't walk away from it herself, then she wants to be freed in a crimson sea. After a frantically fun fight, Travis finally frees Alice from the ferociously vicious cycle, vowing to remember her name forever. But the Red Sea parted onto his face becomes a revelation. All the bloodshed, all the death, all the violence has become a hideously excessive part of his life, and Sylvia and the rest of the UAA nonchalantly profits off of it. Keep in mind that the UAA was originally a con, but it somehow became a professional business over the course of 3 years. Even still, this isn't the first time Travis lashes at Sylvia for how the UAA works. It technically dates back as far as the first game after he defeats Holly Summers, where Travis started to acknowledge that these other assassins are actual people, that they're more than just some boss fight in a video game. This understanding is elaborated upon in the second game. I've already talked about Ryuji, but as I mentioned before, the previous assassins all serve as a means of getting to Travis, be it through how he inspired other up-and-coming assassins, or demonstrating the type of monster assassins like Travis can be. Although he's too dense to comprehend any of this, he begins to show varying levels of respect for the assassins that he faces after Ryuji's death. From smaller moments like complimenting and memorizing Margaret's catchy song before she falls to her fate, to bigger actions like cutting open Captain Vladimir's helmet and letting him rest in peace so that he can celebrate his return to Earth. It all culminates into Travis's speech about how these assassins, no, these people, are just as alive as everyone else, despite the UAA tossing them aside like they're not. Therefore, Travis announces that he's going to tear down the UAA and become a real hero by his standards, potentially being a perfect finale for Travis's arc in a desperate struggle. But you don't pay attention to how I word my sentences, do you? There is no way you can talk about No More Heroes 2 without at least name-dropping Jasper Bat Jr., or as the internet used to say around 10 years ago, Jasper Bastard Jr., or Bastard Twat Jr., or Little F***ing Bastard. Would you believe me if I told you that all of these names were coined by grown men a decade older than me? As negative as the opinions on him have been, everyone agrees that this is an awful final boss. I know how bad it is. You know how bad it is. Even your mom hasn't heard from you in months. Get off the internet to go give her a call. Not now though. Finish my video first, please. That said, not everyone considers this a complete failure of the game. I've heard theories that this fight was supposed to be bad to solidify the idea that revenge isn't satisfying. Because it totally makes sense to have a 3-phase final boss intentionally terrible. That's definitely not the stupidest thing I've heard in the history of stupid things I've heard. Along with that, if this was truly supposed to convey that idea, then why is there no focus on how Travis feels after killing Jasper? There's focus on the UAA's financial collapse, but there's no reaction from Travis. Or at least it's not framed that way. The credits roll after Travis says, "Sweet paradise." In what way does Travis feel unsatisfied? If the fight was the only symbolism for revenge, then it's sloppy at best and on the nose at worst. And all 10 longtime fans of my channel know how I feel about games being on the nose. I believe that this message would work way better if Jasper wasn't the final boss, and that the real final fight was with Alice Twilight. It's an unoriginal thought, but hear me out. Jasper's death remains the same, and so does the scene afterward. But then the player gets an option to choose between a normal and true ending, just like the first game. The normal ending will have the UAA go bankrupt like expected, but in the true ending, just before Sylvia aligns her hand with Travis's, she gets a random call from Alice asking to see Travis since she has some information related to Jasper and the fall of Pizza Bat. Travis accepts the call because he's intrigued by the info on Jasper rather than the UAA's potential survival. Travis and Alice have the same conversation as before, but with new dialogue going over Travis gaining revenge. She could talk about how shallow it is to kill others for revenge, as well as mention his double standards for intending to spare Ryuji and showing respect to Captain Vladimir. And Travis would slowly come to an agreement on that. In their conversation of killing someone to set them free would stand just as strong. Just so this fight has more weight to it, at some point she could reveal to Travis that Margaret was her sister, Captain Vladimir was a hero that she looked up to, and Ryuji was, let's say, something of a close friend. But instead of yearning for revenge on Travis, she'd thank Travis for setting them free of the assassin's cycle, and then ask Travis to do the same for her. Alice's death plays out the same, but this time Sylvia would react in disappointment and shock instead of distaste. That's all I have to say, though keep in mind that I'm not trying to fix any of these cutscenes, but simply reworking them into a new proposal. But if you want to know the story beats that I would actually want to fix, well, let's just say that I had no idea elephants could orgasm, but this one over here keeps screaming, "The plot is in my hole!" I'm not gonna say which hole. No More Heroes 2 has scant but shocking inconsistencies within its plot. Supposedly, Jasper Bat Jr. funded the UAA just like how he bought out nearly every business in Santa Destroy. This was done so that he could get revenge on Travis. I can understand that, but in the case of the UAA, how did it work exactly? The first game had a plot twist where the UAA wasn't even a real association, so did Jasper give it enough money to become legit? Did Sylvia con Jasper? If she did, then wouldn't she technically be partially responsible for Bishop's death? The game itself admits that it doesn't want to elaborate on any of this. And while that's funny, is this just a way for Sylvia to hide the truth from Travis? I know that these all sound like theories, but it's me being frustrated because it really wouldn't take that much time to explain. And even if it did, why couldn't you just fast forwarded through the exposition like with Jean's backstory? I get that these games don't take their stories too seriously, but that doesn't excuse rushing the plot to create all of these holes. And speaking of rushed plots, what about the rushed feel of the content? Promising a battle royale only to have Dr. Let's Shake kill them all before Travis even shows up? Or rank 6 and 5? That would have been a perfect place to have Henry be playable. Everyone wants more Henry. And yes, I mean everyone, even your mom, because when you eventually call her after months of not doing so, she is going to tell you Henry should have had more levels in No More Heroes 2 Desperate Struggle for the Nintendo Wii that got ported onto the Nintendo Switch. I need to chill the out, jeez. It really does suck because we were so close to getting a perfect follow-up. But alas, No More Heroes 2 is an imperfect game, but a good sequel. Despite the issues that this game has within its story and content, everything else about the game is impeccable. and as a sequel, it maintains more than enough positive aspects of its predecessor while adding all sorts of cool new stuff to help it stand out on its own. Expanding on Travis's character was amazing enough, but making better bosses, music, writing, graphics, themes, and utilization of previous themes all make me enjoy this game more than the first. Once again, Genry Perez and the Gaming Brit Show go over this game's shortcomings better than I could, and even go more in depth on what this game does right. But, given how No More Heroes is getting a resurgence in popularity, I thought that talking about the series as a new fan would give people a new perspective. I do intend to check out Travis Strikes Again at some point in the future, since I do like Travis as a character enough. And I'll even check out some of Grasshopper's other works like Killer 7. Also, I'm currently playing No More Heroes 3 while you're watching this video. Will I make a video on that game? Probably. Until then, I should answer a question that you're probably going to ask me in the comments. How can this game be a perfect sequel if it's flawed? Simple, the same way that films like Empire Strikes Back are perfect sequels. Though video game sequels have particular obstacles that movie sequels don't have to worry about. A derivative game is gonna hurt more than a derivative movie, and making the game different from its predecessor is a strand of floss string compared to the rope that movie sequels need to walk across. Thankfully, No More Heroes 2 walks across the floss without embossing DOS, but it still has to pump enough blood into the heart of the first game, and at first glance, it doesn't seem like it does. However, I'd add the argument that if one good game has valid reasons to play it over the other without undermining the other good game, then it succeeds in being a perfect sequel. This is something that most other video game follow-ups haven't been able to pull off. Not so much to the effect of hurting the game's overall quality, but more like you want to play the sequel just because you'd rather not play the first game, or vice versa, and that's just not good enough in my opinion. I can choose to play one of the No More Heroes games for their own reasons. I can replay the first game for its more grounded story and environment, and I can replay the second game for its exploration of Travis and the deathmatch mode, but I can still enjoy both games for the same reasons. If somehow you haven't played these games, I recommend you do so right now.
Now that's paradise.